When you look at the world's best investors, you may think of Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch, Benjamin Graham, or maybe even Charlie Munger. However, there may be another investor you haven't thought about before, and that is Peter Thiel. Back in early 1999, during the dot-com bubble, Peter made a $1,700 investment inside of his Roth IRA, and by 2019, he would turn that $1,700 into a stunning $5 billion. That's over a 294 million % return in less than 25 years. Or to put it in more manageable numbers, Peter was able to compound his money at a rate of 110% a year, far above the average stock market return of 7 to 8% a year. Today, Bloomberg ranks Peter as the world's 288th richest person. So how is Peter able to go from $1,700 to one of the world's richest men? Let's find out. Peter Thiel was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1967, but he probably doesn't remember his time there because when he was just one, his family packed up and moved to the United States. Here, his father Klaus worked as a chemical engineer, and while this provided the family with financial stability, they didn't have much life stability, and over the next few years, they went from living in Cleveland to South Africa to Southwest Africa until they eventually settled in Foster City, California. So Peter moved around a lot. In fact, during his childhood, Peter changed elementary schools 7 times. As a kid, Peter was very introverted, and instead of hanging out with a lot of friends, he spent much of his free time reading books and playing chess. Peter was particularly interested in science fiction, and growing up, Lord of the Rings was his favorite book, which is a book he's said to have read more than 10 times. Peter was also incredibly smart and competitive, and starting at just the age of 6, he began playing chess. Within a few years, he became one of the strongest junior chess players in the United States, and it's said that he used to carry around a chessboard that had a Born to Win sticker on it. Over time, Peter got so good at chess that he earned the title of Life Master, which is a title only given to the world's best chess players. In fact, even today, Thiel is still ranked as the 1,000th best chess player in the US, even though he hasn't competed since 2003. During his childhood, Peter also excelled in math, and while attending Bowditch Middle School in California, he scored first in the statewide math competition. The accomplishments continued to pile up, and a few years later, in 1985, he became valedictorian of his graduating class. So by graduation, he had already become one of the country's best chess players, one of the state's top math students, and the school's smartest student. As a result, Thiel's high school class voted him most likely to succeed. For university, Peter stayed close to home and chose Stanford, where he studied 20th century philosophy, which was a subject he was very interested in. Although he enjoyed the subject, he wasn't a fan of the school's political correctness. So during his sophomore year at Stanford, Peter notably started the Stanford Review, which was a conservative and libertarian newspaper that criticized the school's political correctness. Peter served as their first editor-in-chief and held this role until 1989 when he received his bachelor's degree. From there, Thiel continued his education at Stanford, except instead of continuing with philosophy, he decided to pursue law because he wanted to become a lawyer. And just a few years later, in 1992, he graduated with his JD. Straight out of college, Peter was hired to clerk for Judge James Larry Edmondson, who sat in the United States Courts of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, which is just one level below the Supreme Court. Then, just 1 year later, Peter was invited to interview for clerk positions with Supreme Court Justices Antonin Scalia and Anthony Kennedy. For anyone getting into law, this is a very big deal because out of tens of thousands of law graduates each year, only a few dozen get a Supreme Court clerkship. So naturally, when he found out he didn't get the job, he was devastated. However, in hindsight, he says that if he would have won the ultimate competition for the clerkship, it would have changed his life for the worse. Shortly after, Thiel went on to work as a securities lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell in New York, which was a pretty good job for someone his age. However, Peter's law career wouldn't last long because after just 7 months, he left the law firm to find a career where he provided more value. This led Peter into the business world, where in 1993 he would take a job at Credit Suisse as a derivatives trader. But like all of his previous jobs, this one wouldn't last long, and in 1996 he moved back to California to seek a more meaningful occupation. And although Peter would never find the perfect job, he would find a much more meaningful career. Upon returning to California around the time of the dot-com bubble, Peter recognized the effect computers and the internet were having on the economy, so he decided to start his own venture capital firm called Thiel Capital Management to take advantage of this opportunity. Peter would raise $1 million from family and friends, and this would mark the beginning of his VC career. Early on, Peter would experience quite the setback though, and one of his first investments was $100,000 into SmartCal, which was a web-based calendar startup run by a man named Luke Nozek. The startup didn't go as planned and Peter's fund lost every dollar of that investment. But interestingly enough, this investment ended up being one of the most important investments of Thiel's career. Through Peter's friendship with Luke, he was introduced to a man named Max Levchin while giving a small 6-person lecture at Stanford. Levchin found Thiel's ideas so interesting that he wanted to stick around and chat with him after the lecture. The two immediately hit it off, and less than 24 hours later, during breakfast, Max would pitch Peter on 2 different company ideas. The first idea was a cryptography company called FieldLink, which would allow users to store encrypted data on their Palm Pilots, kind of like a digital wallet. The second idea was an intelligence bureau for the space of web advertising. Peter liked the first idea better, so he committed to giving Max funding, and the two would become co-founders of FieldLink. However, within a year, it became clear to Levchin that Thiel was better at big-picture thinking, and the two agreed that Thiel should become CEO, which put Peter's venture capital career on hold. After bringing on a few more co-founders, the company changed their name to Confinity, where they developed a product called PayPal in 1999, which allowed users to wirelessly transfer money and make purchases. Yet as popular as this product became, this actually wasn't Peter's original intent, and his original vision for PayPal was to create a new world currency free from all government control and dilution. That vision never played out though, and PayPal ended up just becoming a popular payment platform. During this time, Confinity continued to grow. However, they were losing a lot of money, so in March of 2020, Confinity merged with X.com, which was Elon Musk's digital payment company that they shared an office space with. Post-merger, they kept the name X.com, and Bill Harris, who was the CEO of X.com, remained in that role, while Elon Musk became their chairman, and Thiel moved to executive vice president. Things would get rocky fast though, and within 2 months, big changes were made, and Elon Musk would take over as our CEO, while Thiel took over as chairman. However, things remained turbulent at PayPal, and just a few months later, while Elon Musk was on his honeymoon, the board held an emergency meeting and fired him as their CEO due to many disagreements on the direction he was taking the company, and they replaced him with none other than Peter Thiel. As the new CEO, Peter began turning around the direction of the company, and in 2002, he took PayPal public at a valuation of $800 million. Management saw a way to gain even more shareholder value though, because just 5 months later, PayPal was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, which was no small feat since the dot-com bubble had just popped. This acquisition immediately made Peter a multi-millionaire, and given he had a 3.7% stake in the company, Peter cashed out with $55 million, which was pretty impressive. However, this gain was much more savvy than it looked, because according to Peter's leaked tax documents, just a few years before PayPal's IPO, Peter was able to purchase 1.7 million shares of PayPal for a tenth of a penny inside of his Roth IRA. So it cost him only $1,700 to purchase a very large amount of the company. Plus, any gains on these PayPal shares and any future investments in this account would be tax-free since they were held inside of his Roth IRA. By the end of 2002, after PayPal was acquired, Thiel's Roth was worth $28.5 million, giving him over a 16,000x return on his initial $1,700 investment. But this was just the beginning of Peter's remarkable investing career. Following his exit from PayPal, Peter decided to get back into the hedge fund business, and in 2002, he used his entire liquid net worth, which was $10 million, to start Clarium Capital Management, which was a global macro hedge fund focused on things like currencies, interest rates, commodities, and equities. This hedge fund was initially very successful, and in 2002, they would return 29.4% compared to the stock market's return of negative 22%. In 2003, Thiel did even better by correctly predicting that the US dollar would weaken, resulting in a 65.6% return that year, compared to the stock market's return of 28%. After an underwhelming year in 2004, generating only a 5.6% return, the very next year, Clarium would return a massive 57.1% as Peter bet on the US dollar strengthening. By this time, Clarium's returns had understandably attracted a lot of attention and money, and by 2008, they were ranked as one of the world's top macro hedge funds, and their assets under management had grown from $10 million to $7 billion. This was pretty impressive, especially since Peter structured the fund to where they would take 25% of all of Clarium's trading gains instead of the industry standard 2% management fee and 20% of all profits. However, things would begin to get tough for Clarium, and by 2011, many of their investors left the fund. Not because of poor returns, but rather because Clarium missed out on the economic rebound after the recession. As a result, money poured out of the fund, and Clarium's assets had been reduced to $350 million, a 95% drop in just 3 years. Although this was unfortunate for the fund, 2/3 of this money was Peter's, turning his initial $10 million investment into $230 million in just 9 years. During this time, Peter was also focused on other business opportunities, and in 2003, he founded a company named Palantir, which is a software company that specializes in data and artificial intelligence. Peter initially came up with this idea while working at PayPal because at the time they were having problems with fraud, so they created a fraud recognition system. Thiel thought that he could apply similar approaches to help reduce terrorism, so he started Palantir. After being founded, Palantir became very important for the government, like Peter thought it would, and it's rumored that the company's software was used to find Osama bin Laden and to convict Ponzi schemer Bernie Madoff. As a result, Palantir has turned out to be another very profitable venture for Peter, and in 2020, the company went public for $22 billion. And considering Peter and his funds owned over 7% of the company, this investment made Peter billions. Finally, as if Peter wasn't already doing enough between running Clarium and Palantir, he was also looking for his own early stage investments. So in August of 2004, he made a $500,000 investment into Facebook in exchange for 10.2% of the company and a board seat, valuing them at $4.9 million. This made Thiel the first outside investor in the company, and at the time, Peter thought that it was going to be a pretty safe investment, and that it was. Facebook would arguably turn out to be Peter's best investment ever, and in 2012, the company would go public for $100 billion. Shortly after, Peter sold nearly 80% of his stake for more than $1 billion, generating him a 2000x return and solidifying his status as one of the world's best investors. Over the years, he's continued to sell his remaining stake, netting him another $100+ million, but as of 2020, he's sold nearly all of his Facebook position and now owns less than 10,000 shares. Looking back, Peter probably wishes he would have held on to more of his stake though, because today his initial investment would be worth well over $8 billion. Today, Peter's involved in a variety of other business ventures, with the most notable being the Founders Fund, which is a fund that's focused on finding early stage investments. He started this fund in 2005 with people he met along the way, like Sean Parker, who got Thiel to invest in Facebook, Ken Howery, who helped co-found PayPal, and Luke Nozek, who received one of Thiel's first ever VC investments, which shows that the relationships you make along the way can be incredibly important. Some of the Founders Fund's early stage investments have been in companies like SpaceX, Palantir, Stripe, Facebook, Airbnb, Affirm, and Lyft, just to name a few. In mid-2017, they even bought $15 to $20 million worth of Bitcoin, which has since grown to hundreds of millions of dollars. Not surprisingly, the Founders Fund has performed very well, and from 2011 to 2019, every dollar they invested from their fourth fund has more than quadrupled to $4.60, which is over double the industry average of $2.11. Additionally, their third fund has seen every dollar go to $3.80 since 2010, while their fifth fund has seen every dollar grow to $2.40 since 2014, far above the average of $1.48. So the Founders Fund has easily been one of the best VC funds over the past decade, and those returns are probably much higher now since this doesn't even include 2020 or 21. Today, Peter also runs a variety of other businesses, and in 2010, he co-founded Valor Ventures, which is a VC fund that looks for tech startups located outside of Silicon Valley. Then, in 2012, he launched Mithril Capital Management, which is a fund that targets companies that are beyond the startup stage and ready to scale. Finally, Peter also started Thiel Fellowship, which awards $100,000 to people under 23 in order to drop out of college and pursue other opportunities like scientific research or creating a startup. Vitalik Buterin, who's the co-founder of Ethereum, has been among the people they've previously awarded money to, so Peter is literally involved in everything. As of 2022, Bloomberg estimates that Peter's net worth sits at $8.39 billion, putting him as the world's 288th richest person. Much of this money sits inside of his Roth IRA as well, and as recently as 2019, Thiel's Roth was worth over $5 billion. And considering it all started with only a $1,700 investment, this could easily make Peter one of the greatest investors of all time.